The Bellgrave Bank had always been the kind of place people trusted without question: polished marble floors, brass railings that gleamed beneath warm lights, and portraits of stern-faced ancestors lining the walls like watchful sentinels. To the city, it was a monument of stability. A symbol of wealth. A legacy. Here is an 850-word expansion of ***. Key point number 1, the hidden ledger ***, written as atmospheric narrative prose, ***, without subheadings and without an ending sentence ***. Most employees at Bellgrave Bank never thought about the basement. It wasn't forbidden, at least not officially, but the unspoken rule was clear: the deeper levels were meant only for the family or for the archivists who had long since retired, vanished, or slipped quietly out of public memory. The new hires joked about it sometimes, how the elevators skipped certain floors or how the keys to the lower stairwell never seemed to fit quite right. Yet no one questioned it. In a place as old as Bellgrave Bank, oddities were part of the charm, like cracks in antique porcelain or the slight unevenness of hand-cut wood. But charm only works when you choose not to look too closely. The discovery of the ledger began with a routine renovation order. The bank had been striving for a modern image: glass-walled offices, digital vaulting systems, biometric locks, and the board agreed that the basement should finally be inventoried. Not renovated, not open to the public, not even photographed, just catalogued. A superficial sweep to assure investors that every inch of the institution was accounted for. Of course, none of the executives volunteered to do it themselves. The task fell to the auditing division, which was already drowning in end-of-quarter reports. That was how I, the most junior auditor on the team, found myself descending the narrow stairwell with a clipboard, a flashlight, and a sense of unease that clung to me like damp air. As soon as I opened the door at the bottom of the stairs, a chill rolled over me with unnatural precision, as if the air down there didn't move unless disturbed. The basement wasn't dirty or cluttered, as one might expect from generations of neglect. Instead, it was meticulously organized: boxes labeled with dates, shelves arranged in perfect symmetry, metal filing cabinets lined like soldiers on parade. Everything was too orderly, too deliberate, too untouched. Dust lay evenly across surfaces, as if applied by hand. It wasn't the natural dust of time, it was the kind used to hide things rather than reveal them. I began cataloguing the boxes one by one, marking their decades and their contents: bonds, old contracts, correspondence from families whose wealth had long since disappeared into bankruptcy or scandal. The Bellgrave Bank had survived everything: depressions, wars, political upheavals, and financial crashes that swallowed institutions 10 times larger. It was almost eerie how the bank always stood steadfast, untouched by misfortune, as if guided by a steady, unseen hand while others around it crumbled. Hours went by before I noticed the discrepancy. A narrow corridor stretched into a darker corner of the basement, one that didn't appear on the blueprint I had been given. It was barely broad enough for a single person to walk through, the walls tightening as if the building's foundation had shifted around it. Yet everything else about the basement was perfectly aligned. This corridor was intentional. Hidden, but maintained. I followed it, feeling the temperature drop with each step. There were no lights overhead, only the frail beam of my flashlight cutting through dust-filled air. At the end of the corridor stood a single door, old, wooden, reinforced by steel brackets that didn't match its historical era. The doorknob was cold to the touch, colder than metal should be in an already frigid place. When I turned it, the door creaked open with such resistance it sounded almost reluctant. Inside the room, there was nothing except a table. A narrow, rectangular table made of dark wood, its legs carved with patterns I didn't recognize. Not ornamental. Not decorative. More like symbols, intertwining lines that formed shapes my mind kept trying to make sense of but couldn't. A thin layer of dust covered everything except the center of the table, where something had clearly been placed and handled recently. That was what struck me the most. The untouched dust everywhere else contrasted violently with the clean, perfect outline marking where an object had lain. It was only when I stepped closer that I realized the object wasn't missing. It was there. A ledger. Heavy. Leather-bound. The type of book that could outlast a century of weather, war, and rot if stored properly. The leather was dark, almost black, but with a strange sheen, as if it had been polished not with oil or wax but with something thicker. Something organic. The spine bore no title, no crest, no identification whatsoever, and yet it radiated a presence that felt almost aware. I hesitated before lifting it. The temperature in the room seemed to fall another degree, the shadows thickening, pressing closer, as if they were waiting. The moment my fingers brushed the cover, something prickled beneath the surface of the leather, like static electricity or a faint pulse. I snatched my hand back instinctively, staring, trying to understand what I had felt. I told myself it was nothing more than cold material reacting to warm skin. But the hesitation grew heavier with each second, like the room itself was reminding me that some things should remain undisturbed. Still, curiosity is its own kind of hunger. When I finally gripped the ledger and lifted it, it felt far heavier than it appeared, as though every page carried more than ink. Dust swirled around me in strange spirals as I opened it, settling in patterns that seemed intentional. The first page was dated over a century ago, written in elegant handwriting that curled and looped with the confidence of someone who believed their words commanded power. The signature at the bottom made my stomach tighten. One word. Bellgrave. The next page bore a different date, but the same name. Different handwriting. Same signature. Another decade. Another signature. The ink varied in shade, sometimes fresh and stark, sometimes faded and nearly erased by time. But the name never changed, even when history said the signer should have been long dead. Page after page, decade after decade, the impossible repetition continued, and the deeper I read, the more I felt a presence stirring in the room, as if the ledger itself was exhaling secrets it had waited far too long to reveal. Here is an 850-word expansion of ***. Key point number 2, The Vanishing Executives ***, written as atmospheric narrative prose, ***, without subheadings and without an ending sentence ***. The first disappearance was easy to dismiss. Banks had turnover all the time, executives taking sudden leaves, resigning under quiet confidentiality agreements, pivoting to consulting roles that no one could verify. It was normal enough that most employees never questioned it. But Bellgrave Bank did not operate like other institutions. People didn't just vanish from a place where every movement was documented, every shift logged, every office monitored by discreet but omnipresent security cameras. That was why the silence following the first executive's disappearance didn't feel like routine. It felt orchestrated, as if everyone had been instructed to look away. His name was Charles Armitage, Senior Financial Director, a man whose presence had always been too large for the small confines of his office. He was known for his immaculate suits and his habit of tapping gold cufflinks when he was nervous, a sound that once echoed through the corridors during audit season. One morning, he simply didn't arrive. His assistant waited, checking her watch, calling his phone, contacting his wife, then his car service. Eventually, Human Resources released a short internal memo stating that Armitage had taken an indefinite leave of absence. No one questioned the phrasing, though everyone felt its emptiness. 2 days later, his office was cleared out. Not packed. Not sealed. Cleared. Every photograph removed, every document gone, every trace of his existence scrubbed with such precision it was unnerving. Even the indentations on his desk, the slight impressions left by years of paperwork and restless elbows, seemed to have faded. It was as if the office had never been used at all. The cleaning crew claimed they had received direct orders from the upper board. The upper board refused to comment. No one wanted to press further. At Bellgrave Bank, curiosity was a luxury few could afford. But the second disappearance couldn't be dismissed so easily. Marjorie Kell, head of risk and compliance, vanished only a week after Armitage. Unlike him, she was known for her blunt honesty. She questioned things. She challenged tradition. And for over 20 years she had been one of the few executives not born into the Bellgrave circle of influence. Her absence hit the staff harder. She had been in meetings only the day before, arguing that certain historical files needed reviewing for inconsistencies. No one knew which file she meant, but those closest to her said she had been unusually tense in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, often staring at the elevator as if expecting someone to emerge from it. When she failed to arrive at work, the same memo appeared. Indefinite leave. No explanation. No warning. Some whispered that she had resigned. Others heard she had been reassigned to a private Bellgrave project abroad. A few believed she had left voluntarily, suddenly drowning in stress from decades of pressure. But those who had seen her last knew none of those theories made sense. She was not someone who quit without a fight. Her office was cleared out the same night. Security footage from that evening later showed something strange. 2 guards escorted a team of cleaners to her floor at 3:17 a.m. The footage cut out for exactly 9 minutes. When it resumed, the office door was closed, and the cleaners were leaving with empty carts. IT claimed a system glitch. No one in the bank's long history had ever recorded 9 consecutive minutes of missing footage. The timing alone sent ripples of fear through the staff, though no one dared voice their suspicions aloud. Bellgrave Bank had a way of encouraging silence without saying a word. Rumors spread faster than emails. Some said Marjorie had uncovered discrepancies in the archives, ledgers, contracts, or perhaps the same anomalies I had begun to notice in the basement. Others whispered that she had been seen arguing with one of the Bellgraves late at night, her voice echoing down the hall while his remained eerily calm. A few employees swore they saw men in dark coats leaving the building the evening before she vanished, their faces obscured by hats pulled unnaturally low. The security guards insisted no such visitors were logged, but no one believed them. Bellgrave Bank had always kept certain doors open for certain people, doors that required no identification to pass through. What unsettled me most, however, was what I found in the archives the day after Marjorie disappeared. While sorting through another row of dusty boxes, I came across a stack of folders that weren't on the inventory list. Each was labeled with a name, but the writing was faint, almost erased. The top folder bore Armitage's name. His signature appeared on multiple documents inside, some dating back far earlier than his employment records suggested. Contracts he shouldn't have had access to. Agreements he should not have signed. And one page, half-torn, edges still curled from tension, held a list of dates, symbols, and a single phrase written in Marjorie's unmistakable handwriting. It read only, "They don't leave. They're removed." I never had the chance to ask her what it meant. That night, as I sat at my desk rereading the phrase, a pale shadow passed by the frosted glass of my office door. Slow. Deliberate. Too tall to be any of the cleaning staff, too silent to be a wandering coworker. When I stepped out into the hallway, no one was there. But the air felt colder, like something had just been taken from the building, not a person, but the memory of one. By the following morning, the bank felt wrong in a way it hadn't before. Conversations were hushed. Eye contact avoided. A sense of dread clung to the marble floors and brass railings as if the building itself had absorbed the fear. And though no official statement was made, everyone could feel the truth pressing in from the edges of the silence. This was not coincidence, not bad luck, not even internal politics. It was a pattern, deliberate and concealed, one that had gone unnoticed only because no one dared to look for it until 2 offices stood empty and 2 names were quietly erased from Bellgrave history. Here is an 850-word expansion of ***, key point number 3, voices behind the vault ***, written as tense atmospheric narrative, ***, without subheadings and without an ending sentence ***. The old vault had always been a point of pride for the Bellgrave family, a relic from the bank's founding days when money was stored in heavy iron chambers instead of encrypted servers and invisible databases. It stood deep in the lower levels beneath the modern vaults, a towering, rust-flecked door that looked less like a piece of financial history and more like a sealed tomb. The metal was thick, uneven, forged in a style that suggested it had been crafted by hand rather than machine. Carved along its edges were strange patterns the bank tours never mentioned, shapes that curved and twisted into forms that didn't quite resemble letters or symbols but something older, something meant to be understood without being read. For years, the vault had been described as decommissioned, preserved only for heritage and nostalgia. No one used it anymore. No one opened it. According to official records, the locking mechanism had been disabled half a century ago. Yet when I first walked past it after Marjorie's disappearance, I felt something impossible, heat radiating from the metal, as though something alive pressed from the other side. At first, I told myself it was my imagination, a reaction to the unease that had taken root in the building. But the feeling grew stronger each time I descended to the lower floors. The vault seemed to hum, an almost imperceptible vibration barely at the threshold of hearing. Sometimes I thought I saw the dust shift around its base, as if a breeze passed through a room with no vents. I mentioned it to a colleague once, casually, testing their reaction. They smiled politely, nodded, and changed the subject, their eyes tightening in a way that made it clear they didn't want to discuss the vault at all. One night, late enough that the building was nearly empty, I stayed behind to review documents that had been flagged during Marjorie's last audit. Papers she had marked with discreet pencil strokes ran through my hands, financial statements, outdated contracts, obscure transactions whose patterns didn't make sense. My mind kept circling back to the vault, not because the documents mentioned it, but because the silence around it felt unnatural. Historical items usually had stories attached to them, anecdotes passed down from older employees. But the vault had nothing. No story. No memory. Just existence. The lights in my office flickered, and a droning hum pulsed through the floor. It was faint, like a generator starting several rooms away, but steadier, deeper. I paused, listening. It was coming from the direction of the vault. I debated ignoring it, gathering my papers and heading home. But something tugged at me, a strange blend of dread and compulsion. I found myself walking down the empty hallway, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing like insects trapped in glass. Each step echoed too loudly, as if the building amplified sound at night. When I reached the stairwell, the air felt colder, pressing against my skin like a warning. Still, I descended. The lowest level was darker than usual. Only a few lights glowed, flickering with a sickly yellow tint. The hum was louder now, low and rhythmic. Not mechanical. Not electrical. It sounded almost like breathing. When I turned the corner and stepped into the long corridor where the old vault stood, the temperature dropped so sharply that frost crept across the edges of the concrete floor. My breath fogged in front of me. The vault loomed ahead, its massive frame casting distorted shadows on the walls like limbs reaching outward. I took a step closer, telling myself it was only the building settling, or an air pressure anomaly, or some forgotten pipe rerouting heat and sound in unexpected ways. Anything could be rationalized if you tried hard enough. But then I heard it. A whisper. So soft at first I thought it was merely the hum shifting, but then it returned, clearer, threading itself through the air with purpose. A voice. Two voices. More. They were layered, overlapping, as if spoken from far away yet close enough to brush the edges of hearing. I froze, every instinct in my body screaming to run, yet rooted by that terrible curiosity that had led me to the basement on the first day. The voices were not speaking in any language I recognized. They were low, rasping, breathless murmurs that rose and fell like chants with no beginning or end. A deeper voice cut through the others, dragging its consonants in a way that felt wrong, like it wasn't meant for human throats. The sound reverberated through the metal, vibrating in my bones. And then, beneath it all, something scraped. A long, slow drag across the inside of the vault door. I stumbled backward, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The beam flickered as if reacting to the noise. My rational mind insisted it had to be rodents, shifting metal, echoes from old pipes. But something in the rhythm of the scraping, intentional, patient, almost communicative, told me otherwise. It was too measured. Too knowing. The whispering grew louder. Faster. More urgent. It no longer sounded distant but just on the other side of the door, as if dozens of mouths pressed against the metal, murmuring into it with frantic desperation. The carvings along the door began to glisten, catching the dim hallway light in strange, unnatural ways. They appeared to move, twisting, pulsing, as if reacting to the voices. My heart pounded so hard I could feel each beat in my fingertips. A sudden thud struck the door from the inside. I dropped my flashlight. The sound echoed down the corridor, booming with a force that had no place in a sealed chamber unused for 50 years. Dust exploded outward from the door frame. My legs finally remembered how to move, and I turned to run, tripping over myself as the whispers crescendoed into a cacophony of hissing, gasping sounds that chased me up the stairwell. I didn't stop until I reached the lobby, where warm lights and polished marble replaced the cold and the dark. Even there, my ears still rang with the echoes of those voices. No one believed me when I tried to describe what I heard. They chalked it up to exhaustion or stress or the kind of auditory hallucination common in enclosed, silent spaces. But I knew what I had heard. I felt it in the weight of my bones, the cold that clung to me long after I left the basement, and the certainty that whatever lay behind that vault door was awake now, listening, waiting for someone to come close again. Here is an 850-word expansion of ***, key point number 4, the Bellgrave Pact ***, written as dark, atmospheric narrative prose ***, without any subheadings and without an ending sentence ***. History has a strange way of smoothing over the edges of powerful families, turning their ruthlessness into legend and their secrets into romantic folklore. The Bellgraves were no exception. For more than a century, their name had been synonymous with wealth, influence, and an almost uncanny ability to remain untouched by financial catastrophe. Every era had its storms, wars, recessions, market collapses, but somehow the Bellgrave Bank always emerged not just stable, but stronger. It was a joke among smaller bankers that if the world ever fell apart, the Bellgraves would be the ones selling the map to rebuild it. But jokes have a way of hiding truths people are too afraid to acknowledge. I began noticing the pattern after Marjorie's files resurfaced, fragments of her handwriting scribbled across old documents, her circles and arrows and underlined dates hinting at a narrative she hadn't lived long enough to finish. She had been tracking these financial crises, mapping them like constellations, tracing invisible lines between eras that should have had no connection. Every 10 to 20 years, something catastrophic happened in the global market, always unpredictable, always devastating, always beneficial to the Bellgrave interests. Not coincidentally beneficial. Perfectly, mathematically advantageous. It was impossible for any institution to be that lucky. As I dug deeper, the coincidences multiplied. I found names, economic advisors, legislators, trade magnates, people who had been photographed shaking hands with Bellgrave family members before they suddenly resigned, disappeared, or fell mysteriously ill. I found investment trails that made no logical sense, buying failing companies hours before government bailouts were announced, acquiring land in regions that would soon become hubs for development, divesting from markets mere days before crashes no analyst had predicted. Over and over, history bent itself in the Bellgraves' favor. It felt as if someone had given them a script of the future and they were simply reading their lines. One night, buried in the archives, I found a sealed envelope at the bottom of a rusted filing cabinet that had been marked for destruction decades ago. The envelope bore the Bellgrave crest, not the modern polished version engraved on the bank's glass doors, but an older one, rougher, with symbols that curled around each other like serpents devouring their own tails. Inside was a letter written in a hand so old and slanted it barely resembled modern script. It spoke of a pact. Not in poetic terms or vague metaphors, but with chilling clarity. It described a meeting in the early days of the bank's founding, when the youngest Bellgrave ancestor, Elias Bellgrave, had supposedly brought the family from near poverty to immense wealth in the span of 5 years. History credited his brilliance. The letter credited something else. It spoke of nights spent in the basement of the original Bellgrave residence, of rituals performed in secrecy, of agreements signed not only in ink but in binding substance, and of a promise that the Bellgrave lineage would maintain control of something referred to only as the Deep's account. That was not a banking term, not a fund, not any financial product I had ever heard of. The letter claimed that every generation of Bellgraves was obligated to renew their oath, and that failure to do so would result in the withdrawal of favor. The phrasing unsettled me. Favor from whom? Or from what? I kept reading. Another line jumped out, a sentence underscored twice in faded ink: prosperity is not earned but borrowed, and every debt demands its due. On the back of the letter were signatures, 5 of them. Each one belonged to a Bellgrave family member whose public biography stated they had died young, before holding any authority in the bank. Yet here they were, signing a document their timelines insisted they never should have lived long enough to sign. The last signature, barely legible, was Elias Bellgrave's own. Next to it was a smudge of dark brown dried into the paper. It looked disturbingly like a fingerprint. The more I researched, the clearer the pattern became. Each financial crisis correlated with a renewal of the pact. There were mentions in old correspondence of balancing the scales, of sacrificing instability to maintain order, and once, in a trembling hand from a junior archivist long since deceased, the phrase, "they trade loss for longevity." I didn't understand what that meant at first. Then I found the ledger in the hidden basement room, the book where Bellgrave signatures continued long after their bearers should have died. The ledger that pulsed under my fingers like a living thing. That was when the pieces began to fit. The Bellgrave family wasn't predicting crises. They were orchestrating them. Or if not orchestrating, then enabling them, welcoming the chaos because something in the chaos favored them. The economy collapsed on the outside world, while something else, beneath the bank, beneath the vault, beneath layers of secrecy and generations of lies, fed on the destabilization. And the Bellgraves acted as its stewards. Every generation had a role. Every crisis had a purpose. Every vanishing executive had stumbled too close to the truth. The Bellgraves were not just bankers. They were custodians of an ancient agreement that did not end with death, did not recognize time, and did not forgive disobedience. I found more letters, more scattered notes. Mentions of the whispering chamber, of the depths below the vault, of the echoes that ensure our prosperity. A chilling pattern emerged. Whenever a member of the Bellgrave family fell ill, or a scandal threatened their reputation, or the public interest waned, something catastrophic happened elsewhere in the world, balancing their loss with someone else's ruin. The bank surged. Their power solidified. Their influence widened. And beneath it all, the pact endured, inked in something darker than any history book would ever dare to record. Here is an 850-word expansion of ***, key point number 5, the blood signature ***, written as dark, atmospheric narrative prose ***, without any subheadings and without an ending sentence ***, as you requested. Some discoveries feel like they happen in a single moment, but in truth they gather over time, small impressions forming an unspoken truth that finally, inevitably, becomes undeniable. That was how it felt with the ledger. The more pages I turned, the more I understood that the Bellgrave's power didn't come from influence, intellect, or inherited wealth. It came from something older, deeper, and far more disturbing than any financial strategy. But it wasn't until I reached the final pages that I understood the true horror of what bound the family to the bank. Those last pages were different from the rest. The handwriting became erratic, slanted, rushed. The ink appeared darker, thicker, as if the pen had been pressed too hard or dipped into a substance more viscous than standard ink. The dates on those pages no longer aligned with any reasonable timeline. Some signatures overlapped by decades, claiming the same name despite the family records showing that the signer had died long before the next date was ever written. It was as if time obeyed a different logic in the pages of that book. The most unsettling thing was the ink itself. At first glance, it simply looked old, having faded into a brownish shade that often happens with antiquated documents. But under the cold light of my flashlight, the color seemed too dark, too organic. When I touched one of the signatures, very lightly, the ink did not smear or flake. It felt raised, like dried resin. A metallic scent rose from the page, faint but unmistakable. The kind of scent that curls in the nose and clings to memory in a way nothing else can. It smelled like blood. The realization settled over me slowly, as if my mind rejected it at first and had to circle back, step by step, until there was no denying what the pages were covered in. Not ink. Not paint. Something that had come from the Bellgraves themselves. The ledger wasn't documenting their commitment, it was extracting it. The older signatures were lighter, cracked with age. The more recent ones were darker, almost sticker-looking, as if not entirely dry. The last few pages were so saturated they looked glossy, reflecting faint ripples of light when I tilted the book. Whatever had been written there had been done with a deliberate, unwavering hand. As if each stroke had weight, meaning, consequence. The chilling part was how many signatures there were. Not one per generation. Not even one per individual. Some Bellgraves had signed multiple times, dozens, in some cases, each entry more frantic, more jagged, more desperate than the one before. It was as though they had been called back to the ledger again and again, compelled to reaffirm their loyalty, or perhaps to prolong something that should have ended long ago. One name appeared more than any other. Elias Bellgrave. The founder. The first handwriting was elegant and strong, but the later signatures were barely legible, shaking so violently across the page that I could almost picture hands trembling as the pen carved through the parchment. The dates beside these signatures stretched over a span impossible for a human lifetime. Yet there they were, each with that same dark substance staining the paper. The founder had signed the ledger long after the world believed him buried. I turned the page and found the final entry. It looked fresher than all the rest, still dark, still raised, as if it had been made days ago, not decades. The name was one I recognized immediately, belonging to the current head of the Bellgrave family. His photograph hung in the main lobby, smiling in a polished frame beneath a brass plaque honoring his 30 years of leadership. Yet here, in these pages, the signature did not look calm or controlled or proud. It looked strained. Forced. The letters warped into one another as though written by someone barely able to hold the pen. A single drop of the dark substance had fallen beside the name, forming a perfect circle against the yellowed page. But there was more. Below the signature, barely visible at first glance, was a line of text written in a different hand, sharper, colder, almost carved into the page rather than written. It read, "The debt remains. Sign or surrender." My breath caught. I turned the page again, but the book ended there. No more sheets. No more entries. Just the thick back cover, cold and smooth, pulsing faintly beneath my fingertips like the slowed heartbeat of something ancient. The air around me grew heavier, thick enough to feel on my skin. The temperature had dropped so low that frost was forming on the edges of the table. Every instinct screamed at me to shut the ledger, to put it back where I found it, to leave the room and never return. But I couldn't. The weight of what I had discovered held me still, anchored me in place. That was when I noticed the mark on the table. A small smear, dark, dried, exactly where my wrist had rested. I lifted my arm and saw a tiny cut I didn't remember receiving. A shallow nick, barely enough to draw blood. But the ledger had a way of making small things feel significant. The smear on the table looked shockingly similar to the signatures in the book. For a single, horrifying moment, I had the unmistakable sense that the ledger was watching me. Waiting. Its pages lay open, blank side exposed, as if expecting another signature. Another name. Another offering for a pact that demanded renewal from anyone who dared learn its secrets. And most terrifying of all was the thought creeping through my mind, quiet but relentless, the Bellgraves hadn't been writing their names to preserve power. They had been writing their names to survive.